In this video, we're going to look at a Research Ethics Board application, and we'll look at one from when Red Deer College was a college, and most institutions have a very similar Research Ethics Board application and checklist. It might be in different forms. The one for Red Deer College, and then as it became a Red Deer Polytechnic, is quite concise and shorter because we work with the participants, those who are doing the research, as part of this ethics application, gather more details. So it's a bit more hands-on. Whereas if you are doing a research application for some of these bigger universities, for example, it's a big 100-page document that you're submitting, lots of detailed questions, because it's kind of a one-shot to make sure you have everything there for the review, and there's not this back and forth that we might see at a smaller institution where we're more hands-on with our researchers. So let's take a look first here at the checklist that we use to check and see if we approve a research project based on whether it is compliant in terms of research ethics. And then we'll look at some forms and some examples so you can see how we address some of these pieces. So if we are reviewing, so if you're on a research ethics board, what are you looking for? Well, in Canada, you would get training in the TCPS2, which if you're taking a course with me, you are doing the TCPS2 and uploading your certificate to our learning management system for grade to ensure you have that ethical training. If you are a member of a research ethics board in Canada, you are also required to do that TCPS2 training and get that certificate. So by taking our course, we've got you ready to serve on a research ethics board. So if you are on a research ethics board, what are you looking for in an application in terms of that research design and methods to make sure that it is ethical research? All right, so what are we looking for? We are looking for, as we've seen before, that the benefits outweigh the risks, that any potential for harm for the participants is mitigated, so reduced as much as possible, and the benefit to the participant and the impact they're having on greater society, for example, outweighs that. When we look at risk, we are considering physical harm, so could they be physically injured? If we look at having them do a particular stretch or exercise as part of our experiment, one group does the stretching, the other doesn't, then how well do they perform as an athlete? That can have a physical harm. There could be injury in that stretching, for example. If we are doing medical research and we're having them test out a particular drug, there could be side effects. And so we do have to outline the risks in terms of that potential harm to the participant. We can also have psychological harm. So if we are asking people things that are triggering, that might cause them to have a psychological episode, to feel depressed, to feel anxious, then we need to recognize that. What steps are we taking in order to mitigate that? So if we're going to ask them questions that are sensitive and might trigger that anxiety or those feelings, are we providing supports in terms of someone to talk to, counseling services, connecting them by providing contact information, by having somebody on hand? What are we doing to help reduce that? And is our wording in our questions, can we do things in the way we design the research to reduce that chance of psychological harm? So for example, we could use projective questions where we ask about people they know. Do you know someone who's ever experienced this? Do you know someone who's ever gone through this, who's ever felt a certain way? And by projecting it onto another person, as opposed to talking about your own feelings and your own experiences, that can help reduce some of that psychological harm, be a bit less triggering because you're able to displace it and put it onto that other person as opposed to yourself. We need to think about injury to reputation or privacy. If there is any kind of breach of information, what does that put them at risk of? In our previous video, we looked at, I asked a survey question where I asked for your credit card PIN number, right? That puts you at risk in terms of credit card fraud. We might be asking you questions. So think about if we're doing a survey that's asking about Gender identity, sexual orientation. Well, if you're not out with everyone else, that information being disclosed might be harmful to you in terms of how you interact with others. So we have to take that into consideration and make sure that the design of our research, the collection of information, the storage of that data helps protect the individual. And so we want to make sure we're protecting reputation, privacy, and so on. We look at requirements for fully informed and voluntary consent. So again, do they know what they're getting into, and are they able to decide whether or not they want to be involved? So freely to provide your consent. So you're not coerced, not blackmailed. You get to choose whether or not you're involved. You decide how much involvement, and you decide when you don't want to be involved anymore. In order to consent, you have to know what your involvement is. How much time, how much effort, what are you being asked to do? Okay. We want to guarantee anonymity if possible. That is, even the researcher doesn't know that those responses came from you. If we can't protect anonymity, so we have an interview, we have a focus group, we know who said what, that needs to be disclosed. We need to make sure that we have confidentiality. So anyone who's not the participant or the researcher doesn't know who said what, who did what, and whether or not people participated. So we want to maintain a confidentiality of our participants. Researchers or supervisors are competent in the area of research. So when we look at our research ethics application in a moment, there's always a section to talk about your experience as a researcher and your experience with the topic you are researching. So you are competent in that field. So you know what you are doing, both in terms of the topics that you're looking at, whether that is going to be marketing or whether that is in health sciences, whether that's in psychology. You know enough about that discipline to be doing research in that field, and then you know the proper research design methods and analysis for that. Okay. Assurance that all research personnel will be made aware of the provisions of this policy. So if you have other people helping you collect data, analyze data, they need to be held to the same ethical requirements as everyone else. Whether that's the person transcribing, typing up the comments from the focus group, or whether that is someone who's crunching the numbers, they all need to abide by the same ethical principles. And we need to make clear what the end use of the data is. So again, if we're having informed consent, people need to know what you're going to use the information that was collected, what you're going to use it for. So who's doing the collecting? If you're doing it on behalf of some other organization, you need to make that clear, as well as what it's going to be used for. When people provide consent, they provide consent for the use that you specify. And you do not have the consent for other uses. So you need to be clear in your consent forms what it's going to be used for. And if there is more than minimal risk, what methods are being used to help address those risks? So we do look at what type of risk there is and what we're doing to help reduce that risk to ensure that people, when they give their consent, they are consenting to that risk. They know what it is, and then we've reduced that risk. The benefits outweigh the risk. Okay, so when we go through these applications, that's what we're looking for. Benefits outweigh the risk, requirements for fully informed and voluntary consent, that it is anonymous and confidential, that we're competent to do the research, that everyone who is involved knows the ethical guidelines, that we've specified the use, and that we have attempted to mitigate the risk. So let's take a look at some examples, and we'll come back and fill out our forms here as we go looking through them. So let's look at an example project and research ethics application. So let's look at this application here. All right, so this one is from quite a while ago. This particular research project, you can see the first part is the principal researcher's name, who is primarily going to be responsible. And we see that here we need to know that they know something about the topic and they know something about research. So in this case, I'm the principal researcher. I have degrees in statistics. I teach marketing research, and then knowing about the content. Well, in this case, what we're looking at is applied and engaged learning. And so what we want to do is we want to get feedback here from students about how their courses are being structured. Do they engage them? What are some examples of where they are doing applied and engaged learning? So how do I know anything about applied and engaged learning in business curriculum? Well, I'm an instructor in that area, and I am the chair of this curriculum delivery task team that has been assigned to look at applied and engaged learning. And then there's co-researchers, other people who are involved in the activity, and so we would want to look at too, do they have knowledge in that area? Then you need to summarize what it is the actual project. And in here you can see in this form, include the purpose of the research methods, what participants will be expected to do, the use of the research, and what the information will be used for. So here this was going to be a Google form that would be emailed out to students. The survey is voluntary, it is anonymous, it didn't collect information about names. The students are informed and made aware they can choose which questions they wish to answer or stop the survey at any time without penalty. So remember, we were talking about that informed consent. Okay, fully informed and voluntary consent. So that means they could choose to answer some questions, they could choose to not answer other questions, they could choose to not answer the survey at all. Okay? They can withdraw from this project by simply not filling out the survey or not hitting submit on the online form. We guarantee anonymity because it doesn't even ask for their name. It doesn't collect it as part of the survey process, which means we will have no idea who actually participated and who didn't. Let's go back here. All right, so who is going to collect the information? What's going to be done with it? This curriculum delivery task team is going to use it to make recommendations to the school to encourage more engagement and applied learning. We're going to use this to create examples and to celebrate some of our great faculty and what they're doing. Now, in this case, there's this concern here that by asking for examples of great things that instructors do, we might also get stories about how terrible some instructors are. And so to protect that, what we have here is that those who are reviewing the survey results will redact the names of faculty. Any identifying information will be redacted before any of this is seen by anyone who is a direct supervisor of faculty. So chairs, deans, anyone before other faculty get any of these quotes or information, all that information is going to be redacted. So we can protect not only the participants in the survey, but also since we're asking questions about their faculty, we want to make sure that there's some protections there as well. All right, data collection. This data collection here, we're going to have an informed consent form, and we're going to have a questionnaire, and we're going to contact the students by email. So when we're filling out our research ethics application, what we would do, see where I put this here, is that we would have an email to students to invite them to participate. So notice in this email here, we are saying who is doing this research, what is the research for. So the Donald School of Business needs your help to identify instructors and courses that are allowing you to be actively involved in the learning process. We want to know what's working well for you. This survey is voluntary, it's anonymous. You may skip any or all questions. You may stop the survey at any time without penalty. So that's that informed consent, the ability to withdraw. However, your opinions are important. So this is the benefit. The benefit of this is that we are going to make the Donald School of Business the school you want to be in. This information is going to be used to recognize exceptional faculty and identify ways in which the school can improve. So here's what we're using that information for. With the exception of the last question on the survey, all instructor and course names provided will be included in the results of the survey. It'll take you 5 to 10 minutes to complete the survey. So they know what they are consenting to. They know how much time it's going to take. They know what they're being asked in this process. And so they will then click on that Google survey. That survey looks like this, asking you, how many years have you been at Red Deer College? What program are you in? And then open-ended questions, because this is exploratory analysis here. We're brainstorming, we're getting ideas. Please provide examples of how your instructors have you doing in the classroom, what you are doing on the job. Please provide examples of what your instructors are doing to get you more actively involved. Provide additional examples to improve the quality of your education. And that last one, give one example of how a course you have taken could be improved. So the concern with this last question here is that, they could write in that Dr. Powers sucks, is a terrible instructor. And so while we want to get at how we can improve our courses, this purpose of this survey and this research is not to denigrate any of the faculty or call out to their superior, their bosses, essentially, who's the crap instructor or who. So we want to make sure that's protected. So you can see in the process here, we've clearly identified that we'll redact identifying information, and that information, people specific, that is that person won't be disclosed. So why the class could be improved is, but who the exact instructor is would not be disclosed here. So when it comes to this survey, you can see here this blurb at the top has a bunch of repeat information as to why the survey is being conducted, the time it's going to take, that it's voluntary and anonymous, and a number of those key informations there. So if we go back to our checklist, the benefit is to improve the Donald School of Business. Okay. We've talked about informed and voluntary consent. We've talked about anonymity. In our application, it started out by showing that these people have some experience both with the topic and the research. We have identified the other research personnel. We have identified the end use of the data. And in terms of risk, we've attempted to mitigate the risk. In this case, the risk is the people we're asking questions about. The risk for the participants is less unless the comments they make are about a personal experience they had with the instructor. So if they provide enough detail that you can identify exactly who the student is and the instructor, then there is a risk to the student, right, of providing that story. Is there going to be repercussions if I tell a story about this terrible experience I had with an instructor? Now I can be identified and the other faculty might retaliate against this student. So what steps are we taking to help mitigate that? And that is the research team is redacting, identifying information before it gets disclosed. So let's go back to the application that went with this. We looked at that informed consent. We have our informed consent. We have our questionnaire. We have our email. The data is going to be collected through Google Docs, not from existing records. So here you would specify about your secondary data. If you're using existing documents, how will you ensure secure storage? We have a non-redacted and redacted version in a password-locked computer. Only the lead researcher will have access. The Google Docs file, password protected. Once the survey is completed, the information in Google Docs is destroyed. Paper copies will be shredded. And so what we get left with at that point, we get left with the redacted version only. All of our personnel is aware of the research ethics policies, right? So, and then we're maintaining anonymity, participant information. So this is to make sure by the Research Ethics Board that we don't have a vulnerable group where we need some additional ethical review. And so here, these are the students. They're going to be between 18 and 30 at Red Deer College. Completion is voluntary, anonymous. We've gone through how that's denoted in some of the documents. It's a one-time event, completion of a survey. So we're ensuring they understand the continued participation is voluntary. So because it's an anonymous survey, they really can only withdraw by not submitting. Or they can choose not to answer certain questions and answer others. But once they hit submit on the survey, there really is no more ability to withdraw that information because we don't know who said what. In this case, there's no rewards that are offered for participation. Students are informed in the preamble that the results will help to recognize great instructors and to improve our delivery of applied learning. But there's no enticements for participation. Now, we're going to talk when we talk about focus groups and email surveys and things like that, where you might have enticements where people can be entered into a draw or where they can get some little tchotchke for participating. We often want to do that because to encourage greater participation, because it is really hard to get people to participate in research. But on the other side of that is the concern that you are going to sway the way they respond based on how good of stuff you give them, right? And we don't want that perception that we are manipulating their responses. Remember, we looked at that marketing research ethics standards. There were a number of notes there in terms of not changing people's opinions, and I think I closed it, but in the newer one, it does talk about limiting the amount of rewards or enticements. And so it's because you don't want to sway people's opinions by offering them expensive things for participating, because then no one's going to accept what they say as being true as opposed to just a bribe, right? Are there any exceptions to free and informed consent? In this case, no, because they just don't do the survey and they know what they're doing. If you have that disguise where you're telling them it's one thing and really it's something else, that's your exception for free and informed consent, and you need to outline how you are going to then, after the fact, inform them of the deception, ensure ongoing consent after the fact, and so on. So those additional protections you would outline there if you have deception. Here we have privacy and confidentiality. How will you ensure confidentiality? Who participates here is not known to the researcher. Identity of the participants is not tracked. We didn't collect the information. The email went out. It didn't collect names of participants. So we don't have that information. The only thing we collect in the survey itself is the year and the program. And in all those cases, that combination of year and program is not enough to identify a single individual. If you have the issue where you identify groups, let's say I have a very tiny program at Red Deer College, Red Deer Polytechnic, and once you identify they're a first-year student and they're in Program A, because Program A only has one first-year student, you now know who completed the survey, that's where you have an issue. So you want to make sure as you're asking demographic questions that it's not enough to identify an individual, that's still a big enough group. It's still like at least 5 people or so that you can't figure out who is who. When you start to get down to, 3 or less, you can start to figure out who, in a particular group, you then can identify based on the comments they make or the things that they pick. And so that's where you have issues, that it's no longer truly anonymous. And if it's not truly anonymous, you need to make that apparent to the participants before they choose whether or not to participate. Are there any exceptions here for how consent is obtained? In this case, they're all consenting the same way, do the survey or don't. If data is taken from existing sources, secondary data analysis. So for example, if we were doing that survey where we asked opinions and we wanted to map it to their grades, that would be where we're taking from existing sources. And then we would then not be anonymous because we would know their opinions and their grades to map them together. So if the data is taken from existing sources, is there any issues with confidentiality and anonymity is what you're specifying here. Here we have risk. We talked about the different types of risk a moment ago. And so here's where we would outline any risks. So no risk here to participants or researchers. And then we have our statements here. So we can see as we look at our checklist we've gone through that this one's just a simple cross-sectional survey, a one-time. It's anonymous. So in terms of the participants here, the people who complete the survey, there's minimal risk. They know what they're getting into. We can look at another example here. Here's an application. Here's a research project where, in this case, what we're doing is a survey of students 6 months after they completed a course to see what they remember. And we ask about how they like to learn and what they think is most effective. And does that match how they were taught? And does that mean they can better recall information? If they like the way it was taught, if they think it's effective, are they more likely to remember that material than material that was taught using methods they don't like as much? You can see in this application, if we're reviewing it, we need to know who's the researcher. We need to know that they know things about the research process and the topic. Here we're doing learning and engagement in introductory microeconomics. Summary of the proposal is we're going to assess student experiences. We're going to see how well they remember material from 6 months previous. We're going to have an informed consent form and a questionnaire. And it's all going to be in one document. Location of data collection, when it's going to start. Indicate sources are from existing records, no secondary data here. And then data is going to be stored in a locked filing cabinet. Here they're doing paper. The previous example was electronic. And so we're going to store that information. Our participants here are going to be business students. And then we want to make sure we have that informed consent. So we're going to go and look at the documents here. So here is an example of an informed consent form. So we need to know who is doing the research and why they're doing it. So in this case, we're going to evaluate or assess student experiences in micro, and we're going to look at different teaching methods that were used. So what are we asking you to do? We're asking you to complete a brief survey and answer some questions about microeconomics. It is voluntary, right? Completion of the survey and content questions indicate consent. The survey itself is anonymous, so we won't know who filled out what, which also means that you can withdraw up to the point where you hand us your survey. You can choose to answer only some of the questions or all of the questions with no penalty. And in this particular case, this one, there was actually an incentive to participate. So if we just go back to the application here, what rewards will be offered participants? So bonus marks added to a test. Now, we want to make sure that it is free and informed consent. So these bonus marks are for turning in the survey. We won't know if they answered any of the questions or all of the questions on the survey, but by simply handing the survey back, and then in this case, they're going to sign a completely separate sheet of paper. That separate sheet of paper is going to say they handed back the survey. Now, which survey is theirs? In that pile of responses, is it the empty one that doesn't have anything written on it? Is it the one that's half completed? Is it the one that loved us as an instructor or the one that hated us? We don't have a way to know who was who. So by having this separate sheet of paper that has the list of the people saying, yeah, I turned back a survey in, they will get the bonus marks. So you really get the bonus marks just by handing back the sheet. And that way there is no coercion in this process. Of course, the downside is once your students figure that out, they could just hand back the empty sheet and get free marks. But then it is truly free and informed consent. We have not influenced the responses. And what we do find is that the students will fill out at least part of the survey if it's a topic they care about, and the bonus points are just extra bonus, right? Okay, so in terms of the actual form where you see this here, is that they are told that the content, the questions, so what you put in the survey will have no impact on your grade in this course. So the actual what they tell us will not. And we tell them how long the survey will take. It's not intended to pose any risk. So again, we won't. The risks for a survey where we ask questions about how people feel about things and what they know is that others might frown on how they feel or make them feel bad for not knowing things. But if it's anonymous and we have no way to know who said what, then that should mean that there is no risk. So your participation is not intended to pose any risk here. Okay, so you should see, these are both low risk examples that we have shown in this, but you should see kind of the pattern in these research ethics applications. Who's doing the research? What is it being done for? Do we have informed consent? Can they withdraw? Is it free? So there's no coercion. They can choose to be engaged or not. They know what they're getting into. They know how much time it's going to take. They know if there's any risks to them. They know if it's going to be anonymous. They know that it's confidential. So you should see those key pieces in any research project that you're doing. And what you can see here in this one, again, the top of the survey itself repeats a number of those pieces. It does say that that completion will entitle the participant to that additional 5%. The name is turned in on the top of this page, and then it's separated. So we have two piles and they're scrambled so that you don't know who the people are and then their answers to these questions. Okay. In a case like this where the participants are our own students and we're asking about ourselves, right? We're asking, do you remember anything from a course you took with me? There is that risk of, well, if I don't tell her that she's great, then there might be repercussions. So the way to handle this is I leave the room, somebody else disseminates this form that is not Powers or Quirk or one of the parties who is being questioned about. The information is collected, it is sealed up in an envelope, and we don't touch it until after the grades are turned in for that semester. So I would have no way to change people's grades based on what they answered. Of course, I also don't know who responded, but there is a concern here with the fact that I know whether or not they participated. So in order to make sure that I am not swayed by whether or not they participated or not, we can have a third party hand it out, collect it, lock it up, and then none of the analysis is done until after the grades are in. And that way we protect their responses. So there are additional steps that can be made here to help reduce more of the risk. In this one, we asked about what helps them learn. We asked about what they enjoy, and then we asked them questions about microeconomics, whether they're open-ended, whether they're multiple choice, to see if there's a difference in how much they recall from 6 months prior based on how we taught them. So in all these cases, again, we keep going back to the checklist, and when you're doing your research, make sure the benefits outweigh the risks, that it's fully informed and voluntary consent, that there is withdrawals, that they know what they're getting into, that there's anonymity if possible, always confidentiality, and that everyone involved knows how to do research and knows about the content, that everyone makes sure they abide by these ethics we've been talking about, that the use of the data is clear, and that it's part of that informed consent, and that steps are taken to reduce the risk. So there are other examples we could go through in terms of research projects, but for now we want you to get the general idea of how to design a project that is ethical. So make sure that you know the standards for your field. And if you are taking courses with me, make sure you do the TCPS2 so that you go through some of the other ethical considerations that you need to make sure you understand.